I making this video when I have 5,000 words to write for a university assignment? Yes, I am. But when inspiration strikes, or procrastination, one of the two. But I could not get my mind off of this topic, and so I thought that you could equally revel in this existential crisis in which I found myself plunged into during this very busy time of my life. I do want to be clear that this video isn't specifically about one person. I'm not trying to send hate to this person in any way. I'm more treating a situation like a case study or a catalyst that kind of pushed me to make this video really weird, where we're going to be asking ourselves, where I'm going to be proposing to you, are we being hateful when we criticize people and when we criticize institutions? Are we capable of making a difference as an individual, or do we have no power whatsoever? As someone who's personally involved in social activism, I thought this would be kind of an interesting topic to dive into and consider. So here we are. We're not writing about any of my assignments. We're talking about this. So the catalyst I mentioned to push me to make this video was actually a controversy around this YouTuber called Kristen Leo. And it kind of happened a few months ago, but I only properly processed it and caught up with it now. And it had been nagging me for the past month. The fact that I couldn't let it go made me realize this is something I have to share with the people. Otherwise, how else will I be able to expel it from my mind? Who is Kristen Leo? And what is this controversy that I speak of? I am just going to very briefly explain the situation here, because I know I said it's not about her. This is just about the issue in general. So once again, no hate her way. If you haven't heard of her before, Kristen Leo is a YouTuber from Athens. She's really well known for her content on ethical living, veganism, sustainable fashion. She's been around since 2013, and since she's grown a following of around 350,000 subscribers, I wish. She initially focused on lifestyle and traveling and fashion content, and she was an air hostess for Emirates for a while, so that was a big thing. But she then transitioned to educating others on how to adopt a more conscious and sustainable way of living. She promoted a lot of cruelty-free alternatives to makeup, to food, and to clothing. So yeah, a very specific type of lifestyle. I actually first started watching her around, I want to say like 4 or 5 years ago, and I learned so much. I learned a lot about the garment and fast fashion industry through her informative videos, and I truly admire the dedication she had doing the research on these videos and providing really factual and convincing information, as well as managing to present this all in a very aesthetic presentation and implementing her humor. I just thought she was very talented. So I've been a long-time watcher and subscriber until recently. Her subscribers first started taking umbrage with Kristen when she spent all of her savings to move to the US a year ago, and she made a video titled Why I Moved to New York, in which she unfortunately described Greece as a third world country which she needed to leave to have a better life for herself. Now, I have no personal problem with people wanting to leave their home country, seeking a different type of life, because that is exactly what I did, and I'd be very hypocritical to criticize anyone for that. However, many people didn't enjoy the fact that Kristen misrepresented Greece, essentially. It's definitely not a third world country. She was quite reductive in her reasoning, talking solely about her experience in Athens, but then extending that comparison to the entirety of Greece, which people felt was truly a misrepresentation. She also said that it's really tough there, people struggle to make ends meet, it wasn't an environment she wanted to be anymore, which is quite tone deaf given that the US runs on a very similar capitalist economy with very little social protections for its people, and there are people equally plunged into the depths of poverty there because of these systems. It's kind of like jumping from the frying pan into the fire in a lot of ways. She then posted a couple other videos just, exploring the US, exploring New York, trying out dating there, dating Americans. And then she disappeared for like 8 months and no one saw her. I think she was posting on Instagram, but I wasn't following her on Instagram. I think she was just posting some cute aesthetic photos before she came back to YouTube to post a video titled Back from Control Freak Rehab, where we learned that she is trying to kind of let go of control because she felt she had a lot of controlling tendencies, which honestly I think is a really interesting topic, and I feel I could relate to some of what she was talking about. I can be quite controlling sometimes of myself, of my environment, of those around me. It's an issue, and obviously it's all around a certain mindset. So some of what she said, I was like, oh, this is super relatable. But then she kind of went on to say, like, she kind of realized that she can't control sustainability or exploitative companies. She kind of let go of her own personal responsibility and the concept of boycotting. She basically said, we have to understand that individually we can't make anything better. We just make ourselves feel good by trying. Her era of like social studies, politics was completely over. We shouldn't expect that of her anymore. She's kind of done with blaming the world and the structures for how things are and wants to look more inwards and how she can be responsible for herself rather than how she can be responsible for the environment, for animals.
In relation to control, that's more of like, how is the world around me trying to control me? And sort of a little bit blaming the world for everything. So for me personally, that era is also kind of over. And I feel now for this past year, I've been in an era of self-reflection and looking at how am I responsible for me? Not how am I responsible for the environment, for people, for animals, for fixing the entire world. Not how the world is responsible for everything that they've done to me, but how am I responsible for who I am.
She also said something along the lines of, although she did judge content creators for harmful behaviors, she should have kept that to herself and stopped trying to exert control over others.
And I see it so much with how hyper judgmental we have all become online. I feel like I've done so much of it on my channel, honestly. Like, I've judged so many content creators, rightfully so, might I add. But still, I should have kept those thoughts to myself. But at the same time, I feel like me as a content creator have participated in this culture of just hyper policing and hyper judgmentalism of other people and this hyper control that people online are trying to have over others.
Which was a very interesting take. It was a slippery downhill slope. Kristen then posted 2 now deleted videos. The first in which she was kind of just giving a life update. She was complaining that she was completely broke, but saying that she felt that going back to hospitality was beneath her, so she wanted to find a better job, which naturally people took offense to. On top of that, previously Kristen had sponsored this ethical or like sustainable crypto. There's no such thing, that doesn't exist. But anyway, she had promoted it or been sponsored by this specific cryptocurrency. A lot of people had been referred by her and had signed up but had never verified their accounts. And so in this video, she was like, please verify your accounts, because if you do, I unlock all of this cryptocurrency, which will then become tangible currency to me, and I will become a millionaire. That obviously left a bitter taste in people's mouths, and she received a lot of negative comments that she had changed. Kristen pretty quickly doubled down and posted another video shortly after titled "Today I'm Cancelling You," in which she proceeds to disparage everyone who criticized her. Although the videos are now unfortunately deleted because I think she realized maybe her response was not quite right, was not quite what people wanted to see. There's still a few quotes floating out there. So the one quote that really stood out to me was, "What I know now is that when the masses are kind of all agreeing on something, most of the time they are actually wrong. This is all my fault because of the content that I made. I definitely cultivated an audience that wants to hate on stuff, and an audience that if I don't give them something to hate on and be like, go hate on Elon Musk, then my audience wants something to hate on. And if I don't give them something, they will hate on me." And this is the crux of what I want to talk about today, which is that inherently correct? Is that accurate? Is that what is happening in this situation? First of all, are we as individuals unable to make any sort of change? Or are we just trying to make ourselves feel good? And secondly, is that all there is to it? We're just constantly looking for things to hate? Is that the vibe? In summary, it's clear that Kristen is coming across as far more politically neutral than she used to, potentially quite disempowered. She seems to be having a lot of shifting values and priorities, and there's a lot of speculation as to why that is, including her new partner. She's clearly valorizing the idea of being a millionaire, which is very, very different to her previous goals in life. And I do get it. Like, when you live somewhere like the US, I think it's really easy to become indoctrinated into this idea of pursuing the American dream just to attain a decent quality of life, because life there is so expensive. I can see how her morals can shift a bit, that she feels pressured to give up her vegan lifestyle, that she's not as engaged with social and political issues anymore. Everyone goes through phases, but she does have a platform, and we can't ignore the fact that, of course, when you share such a dramatic change from your previous content, there will be people who will be responding in a negative way to that. I don't think it's fair to assume everyone is going to be completely on board with such a radical shift in values. Like, maybe you just need to find a new audience, like new people. I think the fact that she referred to her subscribers as haters and losers was not well received. I can say that quite confidently. And as many people commented, her videos were a source of education, a way for them to find community amongst like-minded people who cared and therefore felt less disenfranchised by the way the world was heading, because they felt like they could actually get involved, take action, become more educated. And it's a really sad turn of events, to be honest. And who knows, maybe in a year there'll be another iteration of Kristen. I don't think it's necessarily fair to hold people to this expectation of who they once were. We're constantly changing, and some people just change for the worse. Growth isn't linear. But like I said, although I've hopped on about her for so long now, this video isn't about Kristen or about moralizing her behavior, but it's more about the idea that, as she said, people who criticize power structures and political figures are hateful and have nothing better to do with their lives, as well as the fact that acting individually, such as through boycotts, is ineffective. That's what I thought would be really useful to talk about. Is it hateful to call out public figures and companies? I think this idea links to the concept of cancel culture, because this is normally what people mean when they talk about calling someone out. Cancel culture itself has been accused of being hateful and ultimately ineffective in the sense of erasing individuals and companies from the public sphere or causing any course correction. I'm sure we all know this already, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, we're all following. In simple terms, cancel culture is the practice of publicly rejecting, boycotting, or ending support for particular people, organizations, or groups because of their perceived socially or morally unacceptable actions. For example, recently a public relations executive, whatever that is, tweeted this kind of offensive joke that he hoped he didn't get AIDS as he was boarding a plane from London to South Africa, where I'm from. Fun fact, there was an immediate uproar on Twitter, now X. By the time his plane had landed, the whole internet had cancelled him and he had been fired from his job. Following the incident, he said he did regret his actions and also the results and all consequences of said actions, saying, quote, "It's easy and thrilling to hate a stranger online." So once again, it comes back to this idea of hate. There's no general consensus on the idea of cancel culture. Pew Research Institute found that around 38% of American adults believe the cancel culture punished people unfairly, whereas 58% of people believed it held people accountable for their actions, and the remaining percentage chose not to comment or didn't have an opinion on the matter. So let's quickly dive into the two different camps here. Cancel culture has been criticized for being overly punitive, for not allowing people to have the opportunity for enlightenment, to learn and to grow. People are first typically called out on social media, which is very public, where a campaign against them then ensues as the knowledge of the wrongdoing kind of spreads to all corners of the internet. It's been likened in the past to bullying, to cyberbullying, and it's often perceived as unproductive because it very rarely actually leads to social change, which we'll talk about in a second. It's also been criticized for being a slippery slope that leads towards intolerance towards anyone who doesn't hold the same views as you. So very like us versus them thinking, very divisive. This was essentially Kristen's argument, I believe. I think this is what she was trying to put across. Cancel culture has at times led to those in the supposed wrong being bullied, being treated like an outsider by the community, being completely outcast, and one action becomes a reason to judge someone's entire being. There's the argument that cancel culture teaches us to banish and dispose of individuals for not being perfect, rather than kind of engaging with them as complicated and complex individuals. And it often leads to either people apologizing and not being forgiven because there's nothing they can do to change the people's minds about them, or doubling down and not wanting to learn and kind of essentially just making this whole thing an unproductive exercise. On the other hand, cancel culture allows marginalized people a platform, a voice to seek accountability when the justice system fails, and it can allow disenfranchised people to actually air their issues. When conducted correctly, cancel culture could simply be another form, like an online form of boycotting, which is a common tactic in civil rights movements. There's so many movements like #MeToo, Black Lives Matter, which were largely online campaigns where people were demanding for justice and calling out individuals and companies that were complicit in harm and oppression of different people and different groups. It was a way for people to have their voices heard, to finally feel comfortable speaking up when they never felt like they could do so before. Cancelling someone or something is kind of this mutual agreement to no longer amplify or give money to those who are behaving in an objectionable way. And it's kind of seen as like redrawing the balance of power between brands and between consumers, because in a lot of ways, consumers previously felt that they didn't have any power over controlling brands. And now this idea of cancel culture has made brands perhaps be a bit more wary about how they say things, about how they behave, in some circumstances, unfortunately not in all. Anne Hadley, who's the chair of linguistics for African America at the University of California, she likens cancel culture to protesting and describes cancel culture as a way to empower those whose voices are marginalized. She says, "It's a collective way of saying, we elevated your social status, your economic prowess, and we are not going to pay attention to you in the way we once did. I may have no power, but the power I have is to ignore you." Hi, editing time here. I just wanted to add in something that I thought would also be relevant to this. A new phenomenon that we're seeing a lot recently is the concept of rage bait, which is where people will intentionally create and post comments on certain things, trying to get a rise out of people and genuinely seeking out that sort of angered interaction, because any interaction is good interaction online. It's the same idea of like any press is good press. That interaction that you're having with them, that commenting and having a back and forth with people in the comments and frequently seeking out this person's work to hate on them, all of that is like interacting with the channel. It's boosting them, it's promoting their content, and the algorithm is just seeing that you're engaging with it. So it's like, oh, people want to see this, and it will promote it more. I don't need to tell you this is really basic, but I think arranged bait is another way of people intentionally seeking to get a rise out of you. It can be quite obvious in certain circumstances when that's the case, and when they have a history of kind of trolling for attention, for clicks and comments. I think that is an excellent way to apply this concept of non-participation. Like at some point, removing yourself from the conversation is actually more productive than contributing to it. So that's just the one thing I want to say. Obviously, once again, only in certain circumstances, and I would say specifically rage bait related circumstances, not engaging at all with anything harmful ever. It just allows them to keep happening in the background. So I'm definitely not saying just ignore it, maybe it'll go away. I think we've created this conflation between cancel culture and calling people out, and we see them as synonymous, but really they're completely different. And I think, I'm not sure if that came through like across very well what I was trying to say. We call them both the same thing online. Cancel culture and calling people out is it's the same, but it doesn't have to be. I think we don't necessarily need cancel culture, because like I said before, it can like completely eradicate a whole person or a whole company, which actually in reality is really hard to do and can be really harmful and sometimes unjust and sometimes not called for. But that doesn't mean you can't call someone out and you can't correct them. I think we also have to accept that we also don't always know the answer and we aren't always right. I think it's good to be open to what other people have to say, in the sense of try and understand where they're coming from, even if you know it's like, my god, this is obviously so poorly informed, they obviously don't know what they're doing, what they're thinking, and you can be quite insulting in your mind, even if it's like towards a friend, like, wow, they're just so ignorant, but you don't know why they think the way they do. And it, myself included, can sometimes have this superiority complex, in the sense of like, well, I know better, I'm either just not going to engage with them or just like, you know, shout at them or tell them what they should think. Like, this is what you should be thinking, without trying to understand why someone thinks the way they do and what experiences they've had that have formed this opinion. And I think it's in understanding each other that you can actually have a proper discussion, and they'll be more open to what you're saying, and you can have a debate rather than attacking someone. This is specifically in the sense of individuals as opposed to companies. And I think we are more likely to have grace with people we know compared to people online. But I think that is the hazard of social media, is we're just so disconnected with the idea that there's another person on the other side, that we can be quite inflammatory in ways that we would never be in real life. A little bit of understanding and willingness to hear what someone has to say, even if you know your perspective won't change. I think that's incredibly valuable. Facilitating conversation rather than shutting someone down without them understanding what the problem is or how to correct their behavior. I think that's what's really important. So just wanted to put that out there. That's what I was trying to get across.
I do want to be clear that cussing people out online is not completely the same as activism or social organizing, because these entail strategy sessions, planning, building a campaign, performing activities such as getting petitions signed, having a clear goal in mind. All of these things, when stacked on top of each other, should hopefully lead to social change. Cancel culture is only useful and only productive if it has the potential to bring about actual change, rather than hating on something because it's popular to hate on, or blaming and shaming others because it gives you some sort of moral superiority. Most people don't see the change that they want when someone is cancelled. People stay angry, the bad people stay bad, and nothing really changes. A lot of the time there is really no real life impact for these people. For example, Kevin Hart, like, he did withdraw his Oscars hosting job because there was so much hate towards him, but he never actually really suffered any decline in audience for his movies or stand-up specials. He's still very well liked. In 2019, the Surviving R. Kelly series came out, which detailed the singer's crimes. The hashtag mute R. Kelly kind of went viral online, which was an encouragement to cancel him, to boycott him and his music. But unfortunately, just 3 days after the premiere of this series, R. Kelly's on-demand streams jumped from 1.9 million listens to 4.3 million. So obviously social justice was not had. But in talking about hate and hatred of things, is calling out H&M for unsustainable practices, or calling out specific content creators for endorsing Shein and doing massive hauls, or criticizing politicians for harmful policies that negatively impact marginalized groups, does that all feed into this idea of toxic cancel culture and just hating on things for the sake of hating on things? Or is that just a rhetoric made up by those empowered to distract us, to divide us, or make us feel in the wrong for questioning how things are run? I think there obviously is harm in letting these kind of big things over consumer our life. It's very easy to feel overwhelmed by everything that's happening and therefore burn out really quickly, and it's important to care for your own well-being. But at the same time, it doesn't mean we shouldn't question and shouldn't call out others, because how else do we hold people and companies accountable? Like, what else could we do? By not calling this out, it just normalizes it, it reproduces it, and we are all made complicit in the system that's harming the environment and harming other people. I don't think that we as individuals should feel bad for calling out other people or companies if we're not doing it in a way that constitutes bullying. If they have had opportunities to learn and are actively choosing not to act on this, then we have every right to criticize how they themselves are portraying themselves to the public sphere. Otherwise, I think that just kind of perpetuates this idea of self-silencing, which means to stifle your own thoughts and feelings and opinions because you feel that either your opinions have no value or that people will not listen to them or act on them. Basically that it won't make a difference. There's a major difference between cancelling a creator because you find them slightly annoying and calling out companies that are actively causing harm and perpetuating oppression. So is cancel culture hateful? Is criticizing companies and people inherently a hateful practice? I think no, it isn't, but it depends on context. Everything depends on context. That's going to come up again. We have to truly ask ourselves, are we partaking in online cancellation, in true allyship, or to dogpile so that we feel better about ourselves? Are we providing constructive feedback to at least give them the opportunity to change, or potentially for others to see and internalize how they can change their own very similar harmful behavior? I can really see how this us versus them thinking can further alienate people. For example, those in the manosphere, the more we make fun of people and call them incels as insults, as opposed to providing genuine support and kind of shining a light as to how to get out of this very dark tunnel, these young boys and men are going to be further driven into the arms of alpha males. If you haven't seen Adolescence, it's such a good limited series. Everyone's talking about it, so you've probably seen it, but if you haven't, would really recommend. And it really encapsulates this whole idea of young boys and men being driven into this mindset and how we're failing children in so many ways. I know we all have different capacities, but I do think we should try to go beyond just being online, beyond these specific individuals if we can, and actually tackle the frameworks in place that we find harmful. For example, cancelling Steve for saying that women need to get back into the kitchen where they belong. It won't single-handedly dismantle the patriarchy in which we live. We have to think about what our actual priority in this situation is. If it is to dismantle the patriarchal framework, then solely attacking Steve is not the answer, because even if he were to change, that won't change the system. We would have to address the root issues like the education system and the cultural normalization of sexist behavior. If we want Steve as the individual to change, then instead of sending him death threats and very accusatory messaging, we could send constructive feedback on how this is harmful and how we can look into things that might potentially change his viewpoint on things. If he continues not to change, then by all means, stop watching his content. I don't think we should ever support someone that we don't agree with fundamentally, especially if we think that their views are harmful to others. In the words of Anne Hadley, if you don't have the ability to stop something through political means, what you can do is refuse to participate. I just think there is a risk in making out as though someone is completely irredeemable or write them off after just one instance. Once again, this is context dependent. I am not talking about anything that is a harmful crime. Obviously not. I think we're also all quite guilty of having this knee-jerk reaction to something that we see without investigating it any further and kind of operating with this half information. And that's something that I've said before, we really should try do our own research to avoid the spread of misinformation about individuals and about just anything really. I also worry that cancelling people without giving them the option for redemption, once again, if the act is redeemable, which is subjective, some might say, these people might not say those things anymore. They might be quiet about it, but it doesn't mean that they won't use their position of power to still continue harmful actions. They're just probably going to be more discreet about it. I think there needs to be, on top of this, more concrete overhaul and social change beyond stopping people from just saying problematic things. Otherwise, they're just going to find ways of doing it more quietly, and it's going to be harder to actually pinpoint that they're causing harm. I do think we should also remember that people are constantly learning. As Jameela Jamil has said, nobody is born perfectly woke. and we shouldn't expect people to be, it's like a continual process of learning and unlearning. It's more about showing up, even if it makes you uncomfortable. It's kind of about turning your fear of criticism into impactful dialogue and actually trying to change things. She did refer to herself as a feminist in progress, which I think could be wanting to create a better, more equal world, but also at the same time acknowledging that progress and mistakes will be made along the way. That's just inevitable. We're all humans. Honestly, we can all afford to learn from those around us, from things online. None of us are perfect. We all have biases. We all have things to work. All of this can be approached in a non-hateful, productive way. So yes, I do think we can call out and hold accountable individuals, companies, without necessarily being hateful. So a very ambiguous answer to a very difficult question. Can we make a difference as individuals? Once again, a very existential question, one that I worry I can't do true justice to in such a video, but I will try. I'm going to do my best. First of all, I think it depends on what we mean by difference. We may not realize it, but we're making a difference and influencing the world every single day that we're here. When we cross a road at a pedestrian crossing and a car stops for us, others were influenced by our actions. That person in that car, their trajectory for their day has been slightly altered. Their movements have been altered for just an instant. When we pick up Littell on the street and put it in the bin, we're changing the trajectory of where it could have ended up, if it could have been eaten by a pigeon or a fox or whatever, or just in the gutter. We've made some sort of solid difference in the world. We're constantly interacting with our environment, whether we realize it or not, and causing some sort of minor change. Everything is flowing around us, and we have some sort of presence and meaning in the world. As Jane Goodall said, you cannot go through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. I also saw, so many quotes, but I feel like this is just a very quotable topic, and because I'm not an expert and there's far more intelligent people out there who have spoken about this, I did think it was useful to bring in some quotes. But I did see this quote the other day that said, everyone wants to save the world, but no one wants to help mom with the dishes. To me, how I interpret this, it means most of us are so focused on the bigger picture, the external. We don't see the good that we could actually have in our immediate environment. We can channel that energy into more direct or local projects and people around us, which could potentially be more empowering than single-handedly trying to solve the issue of illegal logging in the Amazon, for example. I think we tend to underestimate the impact that we can have in our immediate environment while overestimating the impact that we can have on greater issues, like saying, I'm going to solve the water crisis in Africa. There is also proof that the more we care about the happiness and well-being of other humans, the happier we become. So I think involving ourselves in our community is a really valuable way of making a difference, which I would say does tie into Kristen's point that doing things as an individual it's also to make you feel good, and I don't think that's bad. I don't think it's bad to want to feel good and to want to do something to feel good. Obviously, as long as it's not harming others. It's inevitable that if you do something positive for others, you're going to feel good about yourself and about your place in the world. I think she kind of meant it as an insult, but I don't think it is. I think it's just an obvious byproduct of doing something for others. But also, that's not to say that in all of this, that individuals cannot have really great impact. Doctors, for example, change people's lives every day. There was this doctor called Dr. David Nalan who worked in a refugee camp on the border between Burma and Bangladesh, and he ended up saving the lives basically of millions of people by giving diarrhea patients what was at the time an innovative mixture, which was just water with salt and sugar. After just 1 year, the annual death rate of children who had diarrhea plummeted from 5 million to 1.5 million deaths. Also, just to tag this on here, without individuals, movements for change would never actually materialize or gain momentum. Most massive movements started with a very small number of people and just significantly grew. What we don't see, and I think why we set these really high standards for ourselves though, is that people normally had support to get them to where they are. Even if you look at things like the director of a movie, the author of a book, everyone looks at them as though they're these perfect geniuses who did this all by themselves. And honestly, that's not true. Most people don't accomplish massive feats all by themselves. It's with the support of loved ones, of other professionals, of a team of people who are all working together towards a common goal. We as humans tend to work best when we have the support from others, which once again, is why community is so important, but it's really hard to complete anything in isolation. The biggest name we associate with movies is the director, but there are hundreds of people who brought all of this together and made this thing happen. There's just one name credited, but that is not the person who made every single decision. And I think it's important to recognize that most efforts are collective. I think we also need to reconsider, once again, as I was saying before, like what it means to make a difference. I think it's good to live in line with our values, like recycling, trying to take public transport, avoiding water wastage, avoiding overconsumption of products, which in a way I think like kind of makes us feel established and like we're taking control and making small changes in our lives to help something we care about. At the same time, in this specific example, we can't deny the fact that 75% of carbon dioxide emissions are being produced by just like 10 massive conglomerates. So it makes you as an individual and your tiny carbon footprint feel quite insignificant. But that doesn't mean just because your carbon footprint is insignificant, you can't make a massive change. Like we have to think in that context, what kind of change are we trying to make? We could tackle the root cause of the issue by contacting national or local authorities to encourage them to better improve their environment policies. We could attend local elections and vote on these issues and bring your thoughts, bring your opinions, join local delegations of groups who represent people's interests at governance meetings like at COP. You can make your voice heard and you can help as an individual in whatever way that you see as the most productive or the most effective. Like I said, help really just looks like different things. It could even be making sandwiches for the protesters outside Parliament. You can contribute in so many different ways to a cause you believe in, and no matter what that contribution is, it's helpful and it's making a difference. I don't think we should limit ourselves to what it means to make a difference or what is an acceptable way to contribute or try and measure how we are contributing to something. It's really based on our personal capacities, skill sets, passions. There's so many different factors that influence what is the best way in which we should contribute or we want to contribute to something. And I think it's quite hard to measure. So what can we make of all of this? This feels like a lot to wade through. Although yes, cancel culture can be a useful form of regaining control, I think we should also think about ways that we can contribute to positive change instead of just fueling this online negativity all the time. Speaking from personal experience, it can just be so exhausting monitoring and checking others constantly and kind of just feeling the weight of the world on your shoulders. In this way, I do agree with Kristen, and I don't think we should delude ourselves into thinking we can or should fix everything completely alone. But if this is something that's really important to you, I don't think you need to completely step back either. I think a way to sustainably contribute to a cause you care about is to seek community. All in unison, thank you. Really finding the like-minded people who are fighting for a common cause or have similar interests. In this way, like, you can support each other, you can work together and essentially probably have a greater and more long-lasting impact and just feel less powerless. I think when you start connecting with like-minded people, you really see like, oh, I'm not the only one thinking like this, and you feel more validated in your feelings. And the way of combating feeling disempowered is by taking action of some sort. So yes, boycotting by itself is not always effective, and I think we should be creative in thinking of ways to instill change and to encourage the public to get involved. I think we can mix and match tactics based on the cause. It really is dependent. We can do our research, figure out what would be best, look at previous movements, draw inspiration from them. There's so many things that can be done. For example, my university, they currently invest in a few problematic companies that prop up the border and surveillance industry, which is really harmful to refugees. And this completely does not align with the university's principles to uphold and protect the rights of refugees and refugee students. But instead of immediately launching this public campaign in which we slandered the university, we chose to approach them quietly based on historical experience with how they tended to react to these sorts of public campaigns. And so we were conducting closed-door advocacy, portrayed it to university representatives as an opportunity for collaboration. We can work together. In the end, the university was actually really willing to have this conversation with us, whereas I think if we'd gone public immediately, it would have put their back up and they would have been way less willing to negotiate with us. Of course, this isn't always the perfect solution. I think it's quite easy for companies to give you the runaround if you're trying to do closed-door advocacy. So sometimes you'd have no choice but to launch a public campaign if they continually refuse to engage with you. But I think we should acknowledge that there are so many different ways to instill changes, and we have to be very tactical about how we're going to do that and what is the best approach for each situation. Something else I've seen with all of this is that we all feel the pressure to act, to speak out, because otherwise we're part of the problem, and that's not okay. But we're not necessarily taught how to properly do this. We're told to speak out without even knowing what that really means, and we're not trained for how best to act. And what comes naturally or is the easiest for us to do is to repost a few things on our stories and type some hate comments to content creators and then sit back and wait for things to change. Maybe something that we need to do is look inwards and think what we can actually do for causes that mean something to us, from cracking open a book and learning more about the issue and learning more about tactics to joining a local group. Like I said before, we really do all have different capacities and different things to contribute. you may not have the time or the energy to feel like you can even contribute anything. But I would argue that you could listen to a podcast or an audiobook on the way to work and just grow your mindset and become slightly more knowledgeable on certain topics. And then you can share what you've learned with those around you, have deeper conversations with your friends, with your families on these topics. And it sounds so simple and so small, but we are provoking others to think about these things in a deeper way. Who knows, it may spur them into action and into doing things and into spreading that information to other people that they know. We never really know like the effect that our words can have on others, and I think it could actually go quite far. And I can promise you, if you care, then you are doing enough. We're all just out here trying to make a little difference in our little slice of the world, and we're doing our best. And we shouldn't feel shamed for being vocal when we stand up for something we believe in. And I don't think we should allow ourselves to be hushed into silence for being called hateful. That was a very long video essay, but it's something that's really important to me, and I think a topic that's very relevant at the moment. I think there's a lot of contention around the best way to elicit change and to hold people accountable online. I've seen that kind of stuff a lot, and so thought I'd just throw my opinion out there in the mixture, in the pool, do with it what you will. But yeah, I once again highly encourage you to look out in the real world and see what there is for you to get involved in. I think online campaigns in general can be incredibly useful because you can reach people you could never possibly hope to reach in real life. But it's also useful to engage with something that feels more tangible, and I think that human contact and connection is really important. Yeah, if you're feeling disempowered or hopeless, I really encourage you to educate yourself more, to protect your own space and your own well-being, to seek support from others, to seek to get engaged with other people. And I think that will really ease the burden and the pressure and the stress. We're really running a marathon here. We're not trying to burn ourselves out. Realistically, we will not change everything ourselves, but we can propagate change and we can begin that process that will be handed over from person to person. Anyway, thank you for listening to this, watching this video. I hope it was informative. I really feel like I just scraped the surface in a lot of ways. So please feel free to comment below if you have other things to add, if you have thoughts, other ways of getting engaged, your thoughts on whether it's hateful to call out others or whether we can make a difference as individuals. There's so many opinions out there. Let's hear them. Let's hear what you got to say. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a lovely day or evening or a week or month or life. And I will hopefully see you next time. Bye.